So first of all, like I said, my name is Ed Zachary. I work with the Medina County Veterans Service Office. Every county in the state of Ohio has an office similar to ours. We are independent though, so we're county government. We're not state government or federal government. So what you get from one county may be a little different what you get from another county as far as county benefits go. But what we're going to talk about today is a federal benefit, and it should be applied the same across the board throughout the whole state of Ohio and actually across the country. So people always ask me what we do here in Medina County at the Veterans Service Office. Well, let me get used to this thing here. So basically what we do is we try to take a veteran, the spouse, the widow, the dependent, whoever's eligible for a benefit. We try to figure out what that need may be, and we try to plug something in to fulfill that need, whether it's a county benefit, whether it's a state benefit, or whether it's a federal benefit in this case, which we're going to talk about today. And we do that in a multitude of different ways. We reach out to several different agencies for help, not just the federal government, not just the VA. We reach out to the state, we reach out to local churches, local nonprofits. We try to get all the resources we can to help solve whatever the problem or situation is that the veteran, spouse, widow, or dependent is in. So that's basically what we do. Various benefits, like I said, there are county benefits. The county benefits are specific to that county. So if you come for financial assistance or something like that, each county has its own rules and regulations to govern that financial assistance. State benefits are exactly what they say. They are across the board. So every county you go to for a state benefit, that benefit should be the same, as well as U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs and any other federal benefits you apply for. They should be the same no matter which county you go to. And the application process should be the same. So we're going to talk about non-service connected pension and survivor's pension from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Most people have heard of this pension as aid and attendance. That's what it's commonly marketed as out there in the healthcare industry and the assisted livings and nursing homes across the board. It's sold as aid and attendance. It is a need-based benefit paid to honorably discharged wartime veterans. Wartime service is a criteria, or their survivors. It can be paid to a widow. It can be paid to an eligible child dependent. It can be paid to parents in some cases. And it all just depends on the circumstance. For today, we're going to talk about veterans and their survivors, which would be their spouses in most rates. The pension comes in three different forms, as we like to describe it. One is standard pension, which you'll see the rates right here. A single veteran pays $13,931 a year if you're eligible. And then the rate there for a veteran with one dependent. And then the surviving spouse rate is $9,344 for standard pension. We usually apply for standard pension for veterans or widows that are maybe homeless, maybe they have a very low Social Security or no income, things like that. That's where we apply for the standard rate for. The second rate is pension with housebound. And housebound means exactly what it is. You are housebound because of some medical reason and you cannot get out of the house. This is the second step, as you would say, in the pension rate. The third one, which we're going to spend some time on, is what we normally apply for people. And that is called aid and attendance. And that's normally if you're in assisted living, a nursing home, receiving in-home health care, have large out-of-pocket medical expenses, then we'll apply for pension with aid and attendance. It's an increased monthly pension, and amounts paid to a veteran surviving spouse require the aid and attendance of another person in order to perform activities of daily living, or is bedridden, or is a patient in a nursing home, or has a corrected visual acuity. So the aid and attendance of another person is key here. So we always people always ask me, what's the difference between housebound and aid and attendance? And the easiest way in layman's terms for me to describe that is if you're housebound, someone may bring you meals on wheels. If you're requiring aid and attendance, then someone may be helping you actually to feed you or to bathe you or to clean you or get dressed, things like that. Typically for aid and attendance to be applicable, you have to be receiving at least 2 to 3 ADLs from someone else, activities of daily living. And you can see the rates for this is much larger than the standard rate for pension. This is $23,238 for a single veteran a year if you're eligible, and for a surviving spouse, it raises up to $14,934. Now, the eligible criteria for aid and attendance for a veteran and aid and attendance for a spouse is almost identical as far as income, assets, and everything goes. It just pays at different rates, and the eligibility for a spouse is you have to be a surviving spouse, so the veteran has to be deceased. So we talked about that it is an income-based program and a needs-based program. So what is countable income for pension eligibility purposes? We always tell everybody that you should report everything that's applicable. And when it comes back, if the VA counted something that shouldn't be, then we'll inform the VA and get it corrected. Because the key here is if you don't tell them something and it is applicable, and the VA finds out about it a year later, or 6 months later, or 2 years later, or in some cases even longer, and finds out it wasn't reported, the VA will come back and say, guess what? You owe us a lot of money because you failed to report this income. And they will collect that money in one shape, fashion, or form. You can ask for waivers, but typically waivers are not granted unless there's some extenuating circumstances. So examples of countable income: all work earnings, Social Security, annuity payments, IRA distributions, income from a business if you're self-employed or have a business that you own, disability payments in some cases, interest from all stocks, bonds, mutual funds, IRAs, anything like that is counted. Insurance policy payoffs are counted. Typically, the insurance policy that you own, a life insurance or something like that, is not counted. Long-term care insurance, if those are payments to pay for the assisted living or the nursing home, those are counted either as a payment or you cannot count the medical expense that it's paying. Income from sale of a home, and that's got an asterisk there because sometimes it's counted, sometimes it's not. It depends on how that home was transferred and how it was sold, and it depends on the assets. It just depends on where the assets were at the time. But typically we can tell the VA that it is a transfer of those assets because the house is not counted. So if you sell it, we'll just say the house was turned into, cash assets. As long as it doesn't push you over the net worth, then you're okay typically. Retirement pensions are counted, dividends are counted, capital gains, and income from farming. So just about everything is counted. Like I said, we like to report everything and then determine to make sure the VA counted it correctly. A lot of people believe, well, hey, I didn't have to report this income for my tax purposes, so therefore I don't have to tell the VA, and that's not true. Income for VA purposes is not necessarily the same as for your taxes. So keep that in mind. Exclusions from countable income. There are a couple. Supplemental Social Security is typically not counted. Welfare is typically not counted. And there are also some deductions that you can have. So your medical expenses are deducted except for 0.05%. So 5% of those medical expenses that you have that you pay out of pocket cannot be deducted. They expect you to pay up to 5% of whatever your medical expenses are that we're using for a deduction. So net worth. So we talked about income. Keep income and net worth separate. And a lot of people sometimes get that confused, but income is money you have coming in or money that you're gaining in some shape or form as interest. Net worth is basically the money you have, or your assets that you have. So net worth for income purposes, or not for income purposes, I'm sorry. Net worth as far as for asset purposes, they count everything: bank accounts, checking, savings, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, IRAs. Certain trusts are counted. Any other large property other than your primary residence can usually sit on up to 2.5 acres and they won't count it. If it sits on more of that, they're going to ask whether it's being farmed or whether it can be separated. And like I said, if you have like 3 acres, it's usually not an issue. We just say, well, it's all deeded under one property. It's not being farmed, and they don't care. What they're looking for is someone that has 25 acres out there that could sell off some of those lots and count them as a separate asset. They also will count a second home. So if you have a vacation home somewhere or a vacation mobile home somewhere, then they're going to count that as an asset. They just don't count the primary residence. So keep that in mind. Examples of non-countable assets. The primary residence is not counted. They don't care about your vehicles or anything like that unless you have maybe a 1933 Bentley that's worth $500,000. But they don't care about your 2002 Ford. They don't care about your personal belongings unless you're a coin collector and have millions of dollars in assets for coins. And typically trusts for disabled children are not counted. Actually, they're not counted. So if you have a disabled child, no matter how old that child is, if there is a trust open for the disability to take care of them, because him or her, because they're incapable of doing that, then that trust is not counted. I can't stress this enough. All net worth should be reported on all the applications because they will find out. Like I said, if they don't find out the first time, 6 months, a year later, and I can't tell you how devastating it is to find out that you owe $30,000 or $40,000 back to the VA, and they're going to take the pension, and then they're going to take the Social Security and whatever other money you have coming in that they can tap their hands into. So it's always good to report what you have up front. So how do they figure in how much net worth you're allowed to have? So basically, I know years back, there used to be a fixed amount, and that fixed amount was fixed for 20 some years at least. And then a few years ago, the VA came up and said, well, that amount's not fair because, it never changes and it's always been the same. And that amount was, worth much greater worth than it is today. So they came up with this bright line limit that's based on the Community Spouse Resource Allowance for Medicaid. And that number changes every year based on whether it goes up or down. And that's been like that since October of 2018. The number has gone up every year since then. So as of December 1st, 2020, so for this year moving forward, the amount you're allowed to have in assets is $130,773. That is what your total assets can be. So when we talk about assets, again, we're looking at bank accounts, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, anything that you own that is an asset other than your primary residence and those other things we mentioned. I can't stress enough that the pension is a need-based program also. And it says right in the VA regulations, its purpose is not to protect substantial assets or build an estate for the benefits of heirs. So people always say, well, what about gifting? Can I gift money away? When the VA transformed into the Community Spouse Resource Allowance and set that number and that the way they're going to define your assets, they also implemented a 36-month look back. So that look back goes back to the start date, which is at this time, October of 2018. So I know it says 36 months and all their forms say 36 months, but everything before October is not considered in that 36 months. So moving forward, it will open up to a 36-month look back. There is a 5-year penalty period. So if you gift it away or you put money in a trust or things like that within that 36 months, there is a penalty period that they calculate how much money you gave away and what's the time period. And then they calculate based off of those figures over the 5-year period of what you'll be penalized. So how they calculate net worth is they take your total amount of net worth plus your income minus your prospective annual medical expenses. And remember, that's minus 0.05%. And then that's your calculated net worth. If you come under that $130,773, then you are eligible for some amount of the benefit up to whatever it pays, that $22,000 mark. And I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but it's really not as hard as it seems and as hard as they make it figure. This slide here is the one that's hard to figure, and this one just makes me hurt my head. So we devised this slide to show people just exactly how complicated it can be to try to figure out on your own. But what I really want someone to take away from this slide is that little guy with the dollar bill flying around his head. Because if you are on Medicaid in a full skilled nursing home and on full Medicaid, the pension automatically will pay you $90 a month. It won't pay you any more or any less, and you get to keep the $90. It does not apply that way to the Medicaid waiver. If you're on the Medicaid waiver, the regular pension moves forward at whatever amount you'd be eligible for. So if you're into a nursing home, skilled nursing on Medicaid, apply for the $90. And I know I've had people tell me, well, they're already getting 50, what's 90? I can tell you from experience, mom's haircuts are $60 a pop in a nursing home. $90 helps every little bit it does. So I would advise people to apply. Skilled nursing, so home health care, this is a little bit out of the bounds of the aid and attendance pension, but skilled nursing care is available through the VA for the veteran outside of applying for the pension. You can, if you're eligible for VA health care, you can go to the VA and tell your primary care doctor, I need somebody to come into my home and provide me some type of in-home care, whether that is, helping me bathe, helping me dress, pill management, maybe some physical therapy, and they can provide that. It is on a needs-based protocol, and I will tell you that sometimes it can be difficult based on geography. So I know up here in Medina County, it is very hard to find providers because they are so tapped out and already contracted. But in some areas, the providers are a little bit easier to find. So I always tell people this is a way to get in-home health care. It's very inexpensive, $15 a day if you're on the copays for the VA healthcare. If there's no copay, then it's free. And that's whether they come out for 1 hour or 5 hours. So we always talk about this with people too that are looking for in-home healthcare and maybe are over asset levels or over the income levels or just not hiring enough to apply for the aid and attendance. One other thing I want to mention, the other form of pension from the VA is called Dependency and Indemnity compensation. It is payable to spouses of veterans that have passed away from a service-connected disability or were 100% service-connected for 10 years or more. This pension here has no income, no asset levels that they have to, be under or anything like that. It is simply based on the spouse passing away from a service-connected disability or meeting that 100%. And it pays at $13.57 a month. There are veterans that passed away in 1992, and whatever the year is, if we find out that their death was due to a service-connected disability, we can still apply for this pension for the widow and get it for them. So it doesn't matter when the veteran died, as long as we can prove it was due to some type of service connection. And this is very huge for presumptive conditions for our Agent Orange veterans from Vietnam and other areas. Because some of them passed away very young and the laws had changed since they even passed away. So we're able to go back and apply for this pension. One of the other things I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, because we all deal with elderly, older adults, is the National Cemetery Administration. The NCA is one of the best parts of the VA. If I had to brag about the VA, they do their jobs very well. There is a national cemetery close proximity to here down in Rittman. It's kind of our little, Arlington of Ohio, I guess you'd call it. So veterans that are eligible to go there. Some of the other burial benefits that are included, other than the burial at the National Cemetery, is they're also eligible for a government headstone, a marker, or a medallion if buried in private cemeteries. They are eligible for the burial flag. Each family gets one burial flag per veteran. Presidential memorial certificates are also applicable to a veteran that passed away, and then burial allowances. And the burial allowances, the veteran had to be collecting some type of disability or pension benefit at the time of death in order to be able to be eligible for a burial allowance. Those allowances pay different rates depending on whether the veteran died from a non-service connected disability or a service connected disability, or whether the veteran died in a VA hospital or not. So the rates are a little bit different. And basically we tell people, in order to get a burial allowance, you had to be collecting some money already from the VA. So that's important to know. Last thing I want to warn you about is there are a lot of people out there, and I tell everybody this, trying to get each other's money. So please pass this on to your veterans. There's a lot of scams and a lot of people that, are trying to sell discharges. I can get your discharge. We have a lot of, right now, people trying to get their discharge because the National Personal Records Center has been closed since March due to COVID, except for emergency applications for burials. So there's a lot of groups out there saying, hey, I can get your discharge for $35 or $20, and people are logging in and paying them this money. And guess what? It still goes to the same place and it sits there, and they're not getting their discharge either. So, if you need a discharge for a federal benefit, it should be free. And there really isn't anybody that can get it any quicker. That goes for even applying for aid and attendance. There is no, I'm an attorney or I'm a consultant, I can get it done faster than somebody else. Those claims go in a stack and they go through a national queue and they get worked accordingly. We do have the capability to talk to the VA because we have a relationship with the VA. So we have people we can call at the pension center and things like that to fix things, but we can't necessarily expedite it unless the veteran is either terminal or homeless, or in some cases an advanced age over 75 or above. But understand, advancing it still puts it in a pile with thousands of other veterans that have been advanced also. So it still takes some time. So just some warnings. I tell people, if you don't know who you're giving your money to, keep it in your pocket. That's usually the best thing. So with that said, that's our contact information, and I'll take some questions. I'll open this up and unmute everybody. If anybody wants to send something in the chat, I can send something back. Please let me know. And I hope I didn't go too fast. I want to make sure everybody still had 10 minutes to eat lunch. So I'll open this up. Okay. Everybody should be open if there's any questions.
There's a question in the chat.
All right, let's see. How do I get there? Chat. How long does it usually take to get an application approved? That's a good question. And I tell you, we tell everybody 6 months to a year. And to be honest with you, some of them come back in a matter of, a few weeks. I've had them come back in 2 weeks. We've had them stay out there and linger for 4 to 5 months. It just depends on the caseload at the VA, and that's different throughout the year. And it just depends on the complexity of the claim. All claims are not the same. It depends if we have all the records and have been able to answer all the questions up front. But I tell people to plan on at least 6 months to a year because they have to pay bills and they have to know how long before this money is going to come in. And if I tell them it's going to take 2 months and it takes 6 months, they're going to be mad at me. And so I want them to be able to plan financially. Once it goes to the VA, it's pretty much out of our control, except for the questions the VA asks us or you. We have the capability to answer those fairly quickly. But I don't have, the capability to call Bob at the VA and go, hey, Bob, I know Tom real well, and we need to get this rushed through. It just doesn't work like that.
Now, is it, I've heard different opinions on whether it's retroactive back to date of application or the date they received it.
It is retroactive back to the date that we apply, as long as everything is in place from that day. So a lot of people think, well, hey, I have more assets than I'm eligible for, but I'm going to apply because in 4 or 5 months, I'm going to be, under those assets, and the VA will rate it then. Well, the VA rates it, if it goes to the VA and it sits on their desk for 3 months, when they pick it up, they are going to rate it based on what you have at the date of application. So we always try to get people under the asset level, then apply. I mean, that's the best way to do it. Otherwise, you're over the assets. And then when they send it back and you go, well, I'm under the assets now, it's a whole big change. So it's just easier to do it up front and wait until you're under the assets, and then it's payable from that date. Does that answer your question, Bob? Any other questions out there?
Yeah, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, if you apply and for some reason your application doesn't get approved, do you have to wait so long before you can reapply? Or say something changes, like how often can, like your level of care changes, can you reapply right away, or how does that all work?
It really depends. So typically they count, when they look at the income, they're counting it on an annual years-based income. So sometimes we have to wait until that calendar year ends to go back, because that's when the income, if it's an income issue. If it is a medical expense issue that went up, then typically we don't have to wait that year. It really just depends. And that's why we like to talk to everybody independently. But very seldom would I recommend waiting that year. Did that answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thanks.
Okay, so I got a question here from Lou. So if the assets and income are less than 130,000, but there is still a primary residence that has a 200,000 value but not sold, then you can apply. You can. Just understand that once, and this is where we want to have a conversation. Are you going to sell the house? When are you going to sell the house? If the house is going to sell in 2 or 3 months, it's kind of a wasted point, because that 200,000 is going to push you over the asset limit, and then they're going to come back and collect that 3 months back. If you're going to keep the house for, now until eternity or a few years, then I would say apply and let the house sit there. If you rent the house out, the house becomes an asset and the income from the rent becomes income. So just understand that. If the house just sits, then that's fine. Does that answer your question? Lou? Thanks. Okay. All right. Any other questions out there?
I have a question.
Yes.
Does I used to think that it mattered what war you served in or if you were active duty. Can you explain, like military-wise, veteran-wise, who is eligible?
So you had to serve 1 day during a wartime period with 90 consecutive days of active duty for other than training. So if it was somebody that was in the reserves and that's all they did was the reserves and basic training, they're probably not eligible. If they're an active duty person that served the last day of the Vietnam War, which is the date is May 7, 1975, and then served for 90 more days, then they would be eligible. Didn't have to serve in the war, just during the war. So if they were at Fort Polk, Louisiana during Vietnam, they're good.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? No? Maybe? Okay. Well, I could put my, actually, Jenna, can you put our contact information up there in the chat room?
Sure.
And if anybody has any questions, we're always happy to answer them. And I know there are a ton of, rumors out there and ideas of what you should or shouldn't do. And if anybody ever wants to clarify them with me, I'll be happy to talk to you, because like I said, we just try to get people the benefit that they can as quick as we can. I've seen a lot of people owe a lot of money back, and we don't want to see anybody that owes money, because that is usually more detrimental than not having the money to begin with. I want to thank Kelly Rose and Danbury for putting this together for us. It was a great opportunity to get out, and hopefully someday we can see each other in person again. So.
I know. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge, Ed and Jenna. I know you're part of the techie world back there, and I just thank you guys so much for sharing this information, because we get the questions about this continuously, and we want to be able to help our families find resources.
That's what it's all about.
Hey, making a difference in people's lives to help them. Absolutely. All right. Wonderful day. Thank you so much, Ed.